So being as we're really focusing on angiosperms, flowers are really next. In the lab, we're going to talk about gymnosperms and dissect a pine cone, but we'll also dissect a flower. And so we'll see a lot of this again in the lab. And I have to give you full um, full acknowledgement here that I have a hard time getting the right spelling of carpels. And I think it's my human biology bias showing. So carpels and flowers are the female reproductive structures. Um, Not like metacarpals as a bone. So in flowers, it's ELS, and in bones, it's ALS. And I think I've corrected all my spelling everywhere, but I definitely have a hard time with that, especially because sepals and petals are ALS. So we've talked about this diagram of the flower a little bit before, again in chapter 19, but we're seeing it again. So we have the sepals as, the thing that covers the flower before it blooms, so it covers the bud. Then we have the petals, which are sometimes obvious and sometimes less obvious. I think I mentioned poinsettias in the last video, where it's mostly sepal and then the petals are quite small. And then we have the male and the female structures. So the male would be the stamen with the anther and the filament holding the anthers up. And then the female is the stigma, the style, and then down into the ovary. And so the ovary is important because the ovary is going to hold the developing egg and then also ripen to become the fruit. So as we talk about flowers and fruits, as we wind up our discussion of plants, these are important to think of. So we are talking about sexual reproduction here. There is a little nod that asexual reproduction also happens in angiosperms at the end, but this is where we could talk about that alternation of generation and everything that's going on in the flower. I did find that the second half of the Amoeba Sisters plant reproduction video is really good, talking about that double fertilization that's going to happen. And so we talk about germination and we talk about fertilization, and there's a few misnomers with those that as we go through, hopefully I can clarify here. So in these ones, we've got the ovary becoming the fruit, right? So that fruit is the mature ovary. And then in there, we have the ovule becoming the seed. And the seed holds the embryo. And so, there's a few, like I say, misnomers and things to get sorted out here. So there is an alternation of generations again in angiosperms. It gets a little bit more complicated, a little bit more hidden within the reproductive parts of the angiosperm. So most of the body of the angiosperm is a sporophyte or is diploid, like we were talking about with ferns. The haploid spores are in the ovules and the anthers. And so these are, so this is 2N, these are haploid. And so spores were made by the sporophyte, and they're haploid. And so in these ones, these would be the gametes. Those spores formed in the anthers and the ovules. Now, when we think of anthers and the male gametes, we could think of pollen. And so pollen grains produce the sperm. We could think of them as gametes, even though that's a little bit of a misnomer. The spore in the ovule produces the female gametophyte, and it's called an embryo sac. And so we've got the embryo sac or the egg cell and the pollen. That's the way I think about it. The last thing that's on this note here is about an endosperm. And so endosperm is a weird part that is actually triploid. It's 3N. And so to understand what an endosperm is, we really need to go through the concept here of fertilization or double fertilization. So pollen, when it's mature, is carried to the stigma by either the wind, the water, or animals. And this is like the little birds or those gymnosperms using the wind to spread the pollen. And the pollen grain is going to mature and germinate. And so we're not talking about the germination of a seed here. We're talking about germination of a pollen grain. So this is one of those words that gets used twice and can lead to some confusion, I think, about the reproductive cycle in angiosperms. So this mature pollen grain is going to have two cells. So it's going to have a tube nucleus, which is going to produce the pollen tube, which basically goes down towards the ovule. And then it's also going to have a generative nucleus that divides to make two sperm. And so again, with these ones, they would all be haploid. And so here we've got, if you can keep track on this, we've got three different haploid nuclei going on here. So one sperm is going to fertilize the egg and make the zygote. So that's, the sperm and the egg making the zygote, which is diploid, right? And then the other sperm is going to fuse with the central nuclei to produce the 3N endosperm. And so in this one, this is where we get the 3N, so that the N plus that central nuclei makes a 3N. The endosperm is really there to nourish the developing embryo. So like a lot of things in plants, we eat plants and use the polysaccharides that they've stored there for their own energy for an energy source for us. An endosperm is what you can see in the kernel of corn or in wheat germ. The difference between white flour and whole wheat flour is that the endosperm is ground up in with the grain for that whole wheat flour. So wheat germ is included in whole wheat flour, and that's the endosperm of a wheat seed. So the ovule develops into the seed. Remember, the ovary develops into fruit, and the ovule develops into the seed. The embryo is going to have a tiny root and a tiny shoot meristem and one or two cotyledons. And so there's often a seed coat around them, and often we can have seeds in dormancy. So I have some sunflower seeds in my kitchen drawer right now that I've rescued from a sunflower, and I hope to plant next year. So those seeds are now dormant in my kitchen drawer, and hopefully they will germinate next spring when I plant them in the ground and conditions are favorable. So this is just showing that development of the embryo and that endosperm. And again, I think that the Amoeba Sisters do a great job at explaining with diagrams this double fertilization. Just as a reminder, what we were talking about with these, we've got monocots and dicots and those images and showing those endosperms. So like I said, in corn, most of what you're eating is that endosperm of the seed of corn. Fruits are sneaky and they are weird, and there's a lot of, again, variety. So we're going to talk in the lab about pericarps, and we're going to talk about dry pericarps and fleshy pericarps. There are some fruits that are not actually fruits. Take a look at strawberries. So the idea with our definition of fruit is that they should contain the seeds. So the fruits surround the seeds and then aid in their dispersal. Hopefully fruits are attractive to animals, to be eaten. And so, in a lot of these, we could play, is it a fruit? And so as an example, things like zucchini is technically a fruit. Tomatoes are a fruit, where berries not technically a fruit. If you think of where the berries in a strawberry are, or the seeds in a strawberry are, they're on the outside. And so in the lab, we'll also talk about different kinds. So pineapples, sweet potatoes, not a fruit, even though they're very sweet. Pumpkin would be a fruit. Avocado. Rhubarb is not. That is a stem, even though we think of it as fruit. And so, this game of, is it a fruit, or what part of a plant is it? fun dinner game maybe for biology lovers in the group. So this is that seed germination, what I hope happens to my sunflower seeds in the spring. And most of us have seen this if you've planted bean seeds or planted a garden. And it is something that can show the monocot dicot differences. As a final note, we've spent so much time talking about flowers and seeds with these angiosperms. A lot of them can reproduce asexually as well. So those would be offspring or clones, no genetic variation because there's not that mixing of the two gametes. And so this asexual reproduction is great in stable environments like my strawberry bed, as an example. Also, you can often take cuttings. I know in class somebody was saying that they get all their cuttings for free, even suggested going to the Home Depot and taking little pothos cuttings. Spider plants are a classic that are easy to root, and those would be propagations. And then, just bulbs and root sprouts, runners, all of those things. And so here we have some garlic that is germinating. Sometimes you can find that in my fridge, I know. And then also runners of different things. I have no connection to a creosote bush, but it looks fascinating in this ring type structure. So like I said, you don't have to look far to find examples of asexual reproduction in plants as well, probably in the room you're in, or if not, your fridge. Plants are amazing, and I hope you have, some kind of innate curiosity with plants. There are definitely some amazing adaptations out there and some exceptional plants. Trees in the alpine. I've never seen the redwoods or these really long living trees, but BC definitely has some amazing trees around, and you know, I think plants are awesome.